Originally, I was going to make a video on why you should vote for Iwakasa in the Touhou popularity poll, but upon reflection, I realized that what makes Iwakasa great has less to do with him, and more to do with the character he influences. So, I decided to rework my Iwakasa overview into the first of a series I'm calling Men in Touhou. Yes, they exist. Iwakasa is one of these men, and I'm betting a lot of you have never heard of him. So, who is Iwakasa? Almost all of his story happens in Chapter 4 of Cage and Lunatic Runegate, a Touhou book that features stories about figures related to the moon. Chapter 4 is all about Mokou, and we learn about her past. But before we go into the chapter, I'll delve into some background details. Over 1,000 years ago, suitors tried to seek out Kaguya's hand in marriage, but Kaguya gave them impossible requests so she didn't have to marry anyone. In Touhou, one of the people who tried to get Kaguya's hand in marriage was Mokou's father. Mokou herself was not allowed to go out in public, meaning that she was likely an unwanted child. Mokou's father was an aristocrat, and the rejection by the then commoner Kaguya was humiliating. Despite Mokou's dad not winning any Father of the Year awards, Mokou herself still grew to hate Kaguya, and a quest for revenge began. One day when she was still young, Mokou began trailing behind a group of soldiers who were carrying a jar that was a gift from Kaguya. Mokou wanted to steal the jar to spite her. The men ended up climbing a huge mountain. How huge? Well, today, the mountain they climbed is called Mount Fuji, over 3,750 meters. Since Mokou wasn't really athletic, her body eventually couldn't keep up, and she fainted. But then, the leader of the soldiers ran back and helped her with some water. The leader's name was Iwakasa. Mokou noted that by the time they were that high in the mountain, there were less trees and less large rocks for her to hide behind. She suspected that by then, Iwakasa already knew she was following them. From then on, Mokou traveled with Iwakasa and the soldiers he led. They cheered each other on through the perilous trek. For perhaps the first time in her life, Mokou was with people who actually treated her well. Mokou's feelings about chasing whatever was in the jar faded into the back of her mind. When they reached the summit, Mokou asked Iwakasa why the group was even carrying the jar. She noted that he had no reason to trust her, but he told her the truth anyways, that the Emperor of Japan ordered the men to climb up the summit and to destroy the jar given to them. Mokou replied that she was a bandit who was initially trying to steal the jar, which wasn't too far from the truth. The soldiers just laughed, since she couldn't do much anyways. Mount Fuji is a volcano. The men prepared to throw the jar into it. But out sprang the goddess, Sakaya-hime. Iwakasa explained that the emperor ordered him to burn the jar, but Sakaya-hime said back, "If you burn this jar in this mountain, the volcano will begin to resume its activity, and my power will be unable to prevent it. The jar holds a greater power than a god such as I. Do you understand what is inside this jar?" Sakaya-hime began to reveal the full truth, but Iwakasa exclaimed, "You can't tell them that!" "No, it is there right after coming up the entire mountain," Sakaya-hime said. She revealed that the jar contained the Horai elixir, the elixir of immortality. Mokou and the soldiers were shocked. The soldiers refused to move, and the jar could not be thrown in, but Iwakasa tried lighting the jar on fire anyways. Amidst the magnitude of the reveal and the potential of immortality, he was the one person to resist the temptations. But the jar wouldn't catch. As Kaine explained to Mokou over 1,000 years later, Sakaya-hime had the power to prevent fires. Iwakasa and the soldiers decided to sleep at the summit, to decide what to do with the jar next. Mokou spent the night asking Iwakasa about his orders from the emperor. When Kaguya was thought to have left for the moon, she gave the Horai elixir to the couple who raised her as thanks. The couple had no need to live forever, and gave it to the Emperor of Japan, Kaguya's friend. The heartbroken emperor said there was no reason to live forever without Kaguya, and ordered it to be burned at the closest point to the moon. Iwakasa explained that he was afraid if his men knew the truth, they would have been unable to go through with destroying the elixir. Iwakasa was fearful of his men killing each other for the elixir, or someone trying to steal it. So, he kept it a secret. He imparted these fears to Mokou. From his explanation, we can tell why Iwakasa was chosen to lead the mission. Only he had the wisdom to see the burdens of immortality, and the mental strength to avoid the negativities it could bring onto others. Perhaps from telling Mokou this, he hoped to teach her why the elixir wasn't worth chasing. It's a lesson. From when he found her to now, Iwakasa has been the father Mokou deserved to have. He unconditionally cared for her, was honest, and hoped for her to have a better life. The soldiers took turns watching over the jar in pairs, each mistrusting one man alone with it. Mokou eventually drifted to sleep. Up! Sakiyahime's voice awoke Mokou. She looked around. Aside from Iwakasa, all of the other soldiers were dead. Sakiyahime claimed that while Mokou was asleep, the soldiers all killed each other trying to get the elixir. Years later, Mokou came to realize that some men had been burned heavily. Sakiyahime could have killed the men, as Mokou and Iwakasa likely would have woken up if there was some huge battle between them rather than focused killings. But for whatever reason, Sakiyahime chose to keep Mokou and Iwakasa alive. Sakiyahime woke up Iwakasa and repeated the same story. He was shocked, and likely saddened, by the loss of his men, and finally gave up on destroying the elixir on the mountain. Whether he accepted Sakiyahime's explanation or not was irrelevant at the moment. The elixir was still dangerous and should have still been destroyed. Sakiyahime commended Iwakasa for trying to destroy the elixir still, and told of her sister, who has power over immortal things. Perhaps at her sister's mountain, the elixir could be destroyed. Upon hearing this, Iwakasa said with a tremble in his voice, I'm sorry my men caused you so much trouble. And Sakiyahime was gone. Iwakasa and Mokou began to climb down the mountain. Iwakasa was understandably troubled by the events that just transpired, and didn't speak to, or even face Mokou as they climbed down. But perhaps this might have been his one mistake. Mokou kept looking at Iwakasa, then the jar, then the ground, and there was nothing from him. As Mokou reflected on the pointlessness of the ascent in her own thoughts, that original goal of hers came back into her mind. The jar was only guarded by one man now. It was easy to steal, but it would be from Iwakasa. She had no grudge against him. But one word echoed through Mokou's mind. Immortality. Mokou kicked Iwakasa down the mountain as far as she could, and stole the elixir. And so, he died. Iwakasa's one mistake was not counseling Mokou after the death of the soldiers. Had he been there for her and not left her in solitude, it's likely they both could have kept each other in better headspaces. This is not to say, however, that he didn't have an understandable reaction. Everyone makes mistakes. Iwakasa is simply just human. And of course, this still doesn't absolve Mokou from what she did either. Immortality's mortal place in Touhou varies. You have characters like Renko and Miko who see it as the ultimate blessing, its representation of fear through Hijiri, and of course, Mokou's own regrets. But what is truly morally wrong is Iwakasa's murder. It's a crime that haunts Mokou for the rest of her life, with one of her spell cards even being named Honest Man's Death. After killing Iwakasa, perhaps the one person who truly cared for her, she was an outcast for hundreds of years, living angrily with no friends. It was only when she found Kaguya and Gensokyo that she began to find peace again. Mokou had told the story of Iwakasa to Kane, and it was through her friend that Mokou learned that the Yokai Mountain is said to be the original spiritual form of Yatsugatake, the mountain where Iwakasa and Mokou could have destroyed the Horai elixir all those years ago. It's the mountain of the goddess of immortality. It's important to note, Mokou could only continue this step in her journey after finding another friend. Upon reflecting, Mokou thought about a world where she did destroy the elixir. She would have likely had a happier life. But then people like Kaguya and other undying folk would have never known her, and she would have never known them. She was finally a bit content with her life, over 1,000 years later. But she still had an idea to apologize to the goddess of immortality, not for becoming immortal, but for killing Iwakasa. Cajun Lunatic Runegate stands as one of the best written Touhou works, and Mokou's scenario from it is a highlight. Of course, Iwakasa plays a huge role in it. He's a leader, he's relatable in his imperfections, and he's a motivating factor for Mokou's life. He does have his own character traits, but his primary purpose is to provide insight into why Mokou is the way she is. In many series, it's often a female character who dies to motivate a male character, but Touhou is almost exclusively women, so the trope ends up being reversed. It's also important to note that it's not romance that plays a role in the story of one of the few named male Touhou characters. Instead, what plays a role is him as a father figure. When Mokou finally did make it to Gensokyo, she settled into a new role. That role? Helping and guiding lost travelers earnestly, just out of the kindness in her heart. Just like the kindness Iwakasa showed her, over 1,000 years ago. Not a bad legacy for a humble, honest man.